Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. This is going to be a kind of a very meaty class because of the kind of the way that the pages are and the discussions. We're going to actually go through a little bit more than we usually go through, but inshallah everyone is up to it. We're going to talk about the section of a third, who gets the third, and then who gets the sixth. So sort of the same kind of pattern. However, when we talk about the third in this lecture, he will introduce a new concept that was not introduced in the Matn of Abi Shuja', which is the third that the mother receives after the husband receives the inheritance of the deceased wife, that would be. And this scenario is called al-Qarraween or al-Umraytaini because of the qada, because of the adjudication of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. And there are two scenarios in that we're going to go through. So that's going to be something that's new. So right off the bat, that's kind of a new thing. And then the sixth, as we discovered in the Matn of Abi Shuja' discussion in the earlier lectures, there are 7 categories. We're going to go through the 7. And that just takes time simply because of that. However, one of the things that we're going to do in today's lecture is we will be giving some adillah that we did not give when we discussed the Matn of Abi Shuja'. So we're going to add to our knowledge, hopefully, of those ahadith and those adjudications of the Sahaba. And then there is a difference of opinion, a couple of difference of opinions with the grandmother, and however high up. And then there's a difference of opinion inside the madhab of Imam al-Shafi'i I'm trying to find it here on the page, on the last one, about the closeness or nearness of paternal and maternal grandparents. So we have 2 positions in the Shafi'i madhab on that, and we're going to give the dominant position. So it's a straightforward lecture, but it's also just there's a lot of different shares. I will do my best. I want to get through the whole 1/6 thing. I don't want to have that lingering, or else I think it becomes a little too complicated. That's the game plan, and inshallah we'll begin the discussion in the next clip. Okay, so the Babu Thuluth, the section of 1/3, this is from verse 43 to 50. Let me read them. They're not that many. Let me read them all in Arabic, then do the translation piecemeal, and then go to the commentary. So قال المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين. الثلث فرض الأم حيث لا ولد ولا من الإخوة جمع ذو عدد كاثنين أو ثنتين أو ثلثا حكم الذكور فيه كالإناث ولا ابن معها أو بنته ففرضها الثلث كما بينت وإن يكن زوج وأم وأب فثلث الباقي لها مرتب وهكذا مع زوجة فصاعدا فلا تكن عن العلوم قاعدة وهو الاثنين أو اثنتين من ولد الأم بغير مين وهكذا إن كثروا أو زادوا فما لهم فيما سواه زادوا ويستوي الإناث والذكور فيه كما أوضحه المسطور. So he says rahimahullah in the chapter of a third, starting with verse 43, وَثُلُثُ فَرْضُ لِأُمِّ حَيْثُ لَا وَلَدْ. And the third is the mother's share when there is no child. وَلَا مِنَ الْإِخْوَةِ جَمْعٌ ذُو عَدَدٍ, nor any group of or number of siblings. So whether it's multiple siblings or not. Line 44, كَاثْنَيْنِ أَوْ ثِنْتَيْنِ أَوْ ثُلُث أَوْ ثَلَاثِ حُكْمُ الذُّكُورِ فِيهِ كَالْإِنَاثِ. As, for example, if there are 2 brothers or 2 sisters or 3, the rule in this case is the same for males as well as female. So you can see in some of the cases the men and women inherit the same. It will inherit the same and have the same impact. وَلَا ابن معها أو بنته. Another condition is the absence of a son's son or a son's daughter, as we know from the verse in the Quran. فَفَرْضُهَا الثُّلُثُ كَمَا بَيَنْتُ. In this case, the mother shares 1/3, as I have explained. Line 46, وَإِنْ يَكُنْ زَوْجٌ وَأُمٌّ وَأَبٌ, and if there's a husband, a mother, and a father, فَثُلُثُ الْبَاقِي لَهَا مُرَتَّبُ, a third of what remains is allotted to her. This is the issue of that I wanted to mention to you that has to do with the qada of Sayyidina Umar, known as al-Gharrawayni. We'll come to that in the discussion. And then 47, وَهَكَذَا مَعَ زَوْجَةٍ فَصَاعِدَ فَلَا تَكُنْ عَنِ الْعُلُومِ قَاعِدَ. And so the wife or more, and be not lazy towards this rule. وَهُوَ لِثْنَيْنِ أَوْ إِثْنَتَيْنِ, and a third is for two males or two females. مِنْ وَلَدِ الْأُمِّ بِغَيْرِ مَيْنِ, of the mother's children without deceit. Line 49, وَهَكَذَا إِنْ كَثُرُوا أَوْ زَادُوا, and so if there be more or plenty, فَمَا لَهُمْ فِي مَا سِوَاهُ زَادُوا, there is no provision for them in what exceeds the share, meaning the third. And then line 50, the last line for this chapter, وَيَسْتَوِي الْإِنَاثُ وَالذُّكُورُ, and females and males in this case are held equal. فِيهِ كَمَا أَوْضَحَهُ الْمَسْطُورُ, in this distribution as the written law declares. Okay. Now, we begin by a third is the mother's share when there is no child nor any of the siblings. I'm trying to find my page. I lost my page. This is in Surah An-Nisa, verse 11. فَإِن لَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ وَلَدٌ وَوَرِثَهُ أَبَوَاهُ فَلِأُمِّهِ الثُّلُثُ. So the deceased has no children. His father will inherit him a different share because he's an asaba, he's a universal male inheritor. فَلِأُمِّهِ الثُّلُثُ, so his mother gets a third. However, the continuing the verse, if he has siblings, فَإِنْ كَانَ لَهُ إِخْوَةٌ فَلِأُمِّهِ السُّدُسُ, then his mother gets a sixth. That will come in the next chapter. So a third is the mother's share when there is no child nor any group or numbers of the siblings. There are many scenarios, and this is from the Hashiyah, in which the brothers of the deceased partially block the mother from a third to a sixth, and they are gathered in a collection of writings called al-Manbariyya. It's like a mimbar that goes up, and they found that the total is 45 scenarios. Obviously, we're not going to go through them, nor does he go through them in the Hashiyah, but that's just something to sort of to flag that there's a multiple combinations on that front. Line 44, and as two brothers or two sisters or three, the rule is the same for males as well as females. So regardless of how many, there are no siblings. Okay, and then line 45. Another condition is the absence of a son's son or a son's daughter, because we said that those grandchildren or those children take a son's son is like a son's daughter is like the son in this case. So, and another condition is the absence of a son's son or a son's daughter. In this case, the mother shares 1/3, as I have explained. Kind of all going back to the same set of verses. Line 46, and if there be a husband and a mother and a father, a third of what remains is allotted to her. A third of what remains, al-thuluth al-baqi, meaning that when you do the math, it's not actually going to be a third, but it's a third of what remains, and this is because this is how it is phrased in the Quran. And these are the two scenarios that we have. So the first scenario, that the person who died has a wife, a mother, and a father. The wife, the person who dies, the girl, a woman who dies leaves a husband, a mother, and a father. The husband is going to get half. The mother will get the rest of what's left, a third of what's left, and then whatever's remaining, the father will take. In the second scenario, the man dies leaving a wife or more wives, a mother and a father. The wife will take a fourth. The mother will take what is remaining, a third, and the father will take what the remaining of the tarika, the remaining of the inherited shares. Now, mathematically, in the first scenario, a third of what is left in the first scenario actually becomes a sixth, and a third of what is left in the second scenario actually becomes a fourth. But as we said in the rules, on the codified rules of inheritance, it is stated, and she takes a third of what is left, because that is the sentence structure of the Quran. So this is line 46. If there be a husband, if there be a husband and a mother and a father, that's the first scenario, a third of what remains is allotted to her. Line 47, and so with a wife or more, and be not lazy towards this rule. That's the second thing that we just took. And then he says, and be not lazy towards this rule, obviously to remind us not to be lazy towards knowledge. In the Hashir, there's a couple of nice hadith that are related to that I want to narrate. It's kind of a little bit of an extra, but I mean, sometimes inheritance law can be difficult and confusing, so having the reminder is helpful. I see that I'm running out of the time, so I'll pick up the beginning of the next discussion with those hadith, inshallah. Okay, so we're just commenting on this portion of the line 40, the second half of line 47, and be not lazy towards this rule. He narrates a hadith, a tradition that the Muhaqqiq al-Bugha could not find, but he says there are other hadith that attest to it. The tradition is attributed to Anas ibn Malik, that the Prophet ﷺ reported to have said, متعلم كسلان يعني لا يجتهد في طلب العلم أفضل عند الله من 700 عابد مجتهد. So the lazy teacher, the one who does not engage in ijtihad in learning, is better in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than 700 people who worship. So just praising how knowledge is, even if you're lazy towards knowledge. Another tradition, this is in al-Mundhari, and it's also narrated by Tabarani in al-Kabir. من طلب العلم وأدركه كان له كفلان من الأجر وإن لم يدركه كان له كفل من الأجر. Whoever seeks knowledge and gets that knowledge, they get two rewards. If you seek knowledge but you don't get the knowledge, you get one reward. So just some traditions to encourage you on the importance of study. And look, this stuff you just got to go through over dozens and dozens of time until it sticks. I mean, I get the luxury of reading it and preparing it and recording, so I might sound like I know a little bit, but just like you, I mean, I got to hustle and review, so it kind of sticks here, and then it becomes here, and it becomes a part of you. Okay, now line 48. And a third is for two males or females of the mother's children without deceit. And this way the men and women are equal. This is based on Nisa verse 12. So you can see that Nisa 11 and 12 are significant verses when it comes to inheritance. فَإِنْ كَانُوا أَكْثَرَ مِنْ ذَلِكَ فَهُمْ شُرَكَاءٌ فِي الثُّلُثِ. If they are more than that, two or more, we talked about that in the previous lecture, then they are shuraka, they are equals in the 1/3. And then in line 50, closing out this section, and females and males are held equal in this distribution as the written law declares. أوضحه المسطور. Actually, it's not a reference to the Sharia. This is a reference to the Quran, because this is from the Quran. So I would have to correct that translation. Actually, I'm just going to do that now, as the Quran declares. Okay, now we get into the big one, the sixth. It's too long because it goes from line 51 to line 72. So I'm probably just going to do couplets. So he says, rahimahullah, we'll do the first two, and I'm just going to follow how it is in the book on the commentary. So he comments on the first two. So the first two are وَالسُّدُسُ فَرْضُ سَبْعَةٍ مِنَ الْعَدَدِ أَبٍ وَأُمٍ ثُمَّ بِنْتُ ابْنِ وَجَدٍ والأخت بنت الابن ثم الجدة وولد الأم تمام العدة. We know from the previous discussion on the Matn of Abi Shuja' that there are 7 people that receive 1/6, and that's what he says here. 1/6 is the obligatory share for 7, and then he lists 1 through 7. That's what we did. And remember, we did this as an independent lecture because we said this is where you get all of these people have different shares if they're not blocked partially. So this is the section of the blocking where kind of we put the knowledge of the inheritance law in motion. So, and a 6 is the share for the 7, and in line 51 and 52 of the poem, he just enumerates them. The father, the mother, then the son's daughter, and the grandfather. So let's count them together. The father, the mother, then the son's daughter, the grandfather, the sister, daughter of the son, next the grandmother, and the mother's child. And how did I get 8? The father, أب وأم بنت ابن وجد. Father, the mother, the son's daughter, the grandfather. Oh, and then the sister, daughter of the son, afwan. Next, the grandmother and the mother's child. Okay, those are the 7. My bad. I misread my own translation. Okay, so the line 51 and 52, if you were to memorize them, it's just the way that you memorize the 7 categories, because the way they're enumerated in here is quite, they're enumerated with what blocks them. So all of the things that we just read, on their own, they don't get a 6. They get a 6 if. So in the Matn of Abi Shuja', he said they get a 6 if as 1 point. They get a 6 if, second point. Here, because the way the poem is constructed is to kind of help us with the memory and understanding, is first we just enumerate them. I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit because I realize that we need to pick up the pace. Okay, let's do 53 to 55. فالأب يستحقه مع الولد وهكذا الأم بتنزيل الصمد وهكذا مع ولد الابن الذي ما زال يقفو إثره ويحتذي وهو لها أيضا مع الاثنين من إخوة الميت فقس هذين. Okay, so 53 and 54, he says, rahimahullah, and the father has a right to it, meaning the 6th, with the children, and so the mother by the revelation of the eternal. The same principle is applied if the deceased is survived by son who follows the steps of their father always, and the same is for the mom with 2 or more of the deceased siblings, and so on if they be more. ولأبويه لكل واحد منهما السدس مما ترك إن كان له ولد. So when the father gets the 6th if the deceased, his son, has children. That's what the Quran says in Nisa 11. وَلِأَبَوَيْهِ, the father, لِكُلِّ وَاحِدٍ مِّنْهُمَا السُّدُسُ, each one of them, the parent gets a 6th if the son who died left a child. That's what line 53 says. The same principle is applied if the deceased is survived by a son who always follows the father. The same principle is applied if the deceased is survived by a son. So the grandchild will take the place of the son. in that case. And then line 54, 55. وهو لها أيضا مع الاثنين. And the same is for the mom with two or more of the deceased siblings and so on if they be more. فإن كان له إخوة فلأمه السدس. We talked about this in the previous lecture, in the previous clip. That's Nisa 11. And if he has if the boy has more than one siblings, the deceased has more than one siblings, then the mother gets a sixth. Okay, now we're going to do 56 to 60. Definitely will not fit this all in one clip. والجد, let me just get it all on one screen. والجد مثل الأب عند فقده في حوز ما يصيبه ومده إلا إذا كان هناك إخوة لكونهم في القرب هو أسوة أو أبوان معهما زوج ورث فالأم للثلث مع الجد ترث وهكذا ليس شبيها بالأب في زوجة الميت وأم وأبي وحكمهم سيأتي مكمل البيان في الحالات. So 56, and the grandfather is like the father if the father is absent in the distribution of what originally belongs to the father, except when there are brothers living, since they are preferable to him in proximity. So the man dies and he has brothers, the father will get less if there are those siblings because the siblings of the deceased are closer. Or if the deceased is survived by the grandfather, mother, and husband, the mother in this case receives 1/3. The grandfather will also act like the father in a situation where the deceased is survived by a mother, a grandfather, and wife. All their due and his due shall be introduced with a full explanation in the different cases. So this is where we also get a little bit more of detail than we're used to. So in the first line, the grandfather is like the father if he be absent. So he'll get a 6th, as the prima facie meaning of the verse of the Quran tells us. The next one, well, I'm out of time. Let me pick it up in the next clip, inshallah. Okay, line 56. If the grandfather is like the father, if the father is absent in the distribution of what originally belongs to the father, but not in all scenarios. So the grandfather is not in all scenarios the same as the father. Like in one scenario, the siblings. Like he says in line 57, except, so there's an exception, when there are brothers living, since they are preferable to the grandfather in proximity. So remember, in the inheritance, we're looking about who's close to who. Another scenario, two more scenarios, are from the Gharrawaini scenarios that we took in the 1/3 section. The deceased leaves two parents and a husband. So the mother gets 1/3 of what it remains after the portion goes to the husband. If the husband wasn't there and there was a grandfather, they would have the 1/3 together. So if line 58, if the deceased is survived by a grandfather, meaning instead of a father, and a mother, and a husband, the mother in this case receives 1/3. With the grandfather. فلو كان بدل الأب في جد كان للأم معه. So I need to correct this translation. The mother in this case receives around 1/3. with the grandfather. Okay, and then in the second scenario of the Gharrawaini, the deceased leaves two parents and a wife, or more than one wife. The mother, she gets the third of what's left. After the fourth goes to the wife. Instead of the father, if there was the grandfather and the mother would get the third. And that's what we see in line 59. The grandfather will also not act like the father in a situation where the deceased is survived by the mother, the grandfather, instead of the father and the wife. All their due and his due will be introduced with a full explanation in the different cases. Okay, now line 61 and 62, this is going to talk about the fourth of the seven. So 61, وبنت الابن تأخذ السدس إذا كانت مع البنت مثالا يحتذى وهكذا الأخت مع الأخت التي بالأبوين يا أخي أدلتي. And the son's daughter takes 1/6 when she is with a daughter, and make this an example to follow, and thus a sister with a half-sister who is related by the same brother. And this comes from the qada of Ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhuma, radiyallahu anhu, as recorded in Bukhari and others. He was asked about a daughter and a son's daughter and a sister. So he said, I will adjudicate according to the adjudication of the Prophet ﷺ. لِلْبِنْتِ النِّصْفِ, the daughter gets a half. وَلِبِنْتِ الْإِبْنِ, and the daughter of the son gets a sixth, to complete the 2/3. And what is left is for the sister. This is Bukhari and others. Okay, so this is a dalil point that's important. And the son's daughter takes a sixth. That's where it comes from. Line 62, and thus a sister with a half-sister who is related to the same father. And this is based on the qiyas of the previous case. 63 and 64. وَسُدُسُ فَرْضُ جَدَّةٍ فِي النَّسَبِ وَاحِدَةً كَانَتْ لِأُمِّ أو لأبي وولد الأم ينال السدس والشرط في إفراده لا ينسى. So this talks about the sixth category. Line 63, the grandmother receives 1/6 whether she is from the mother's side or the father's side. Line 64, the mother's child, maternal brother or sister, receives 1/6, and the condition of being single should not be forgotten. Now here is where there's a difference of opinion. In the Shafi'i madhab and the Hanafi madhab, the mother of the mothers of the grandparents, they receive an inheritance based on, as an analogy, based on the qiyas of the mother of the father, but not with the Malikis. And then that was the sixth. And the seventh, the mother's son or the mother's child, whether it be a boy or a girl, as long as they're by themselves, they will inherit 1/6. And this is by ijma', this is taken from the Quran. وَلَهُ أَخٌ أَوْ أُخْتٌ فَلِكُلِّ وَاحِدٍ مِّنْهُمَا السُّدُسُ, again in Nisa, verse 12. Okay, 65 and 66. وإن يتساوى نسب الجدات وكن كلهن وارثات فالسدس بينهن بالسوية في القسمة العادلة الشرعية. And if the relation of the grandmothers be equal, both of them will inherit, all of them will inherit, not both. All of them will inherit, and a sixth is divided between them equally by the just and legal mode of partition. So this is also from the hadith narrated by Hakim, that's narrated on the condition of Al-Bukhari and Muslim, that the Prophet ﷺ adjudicated for the grandmothers that they receive a sixth. And this became a point of consensus, وَأَجْمَعُ عَلَيْهِ, and then based on that is analogy for other scenarios. If the relationship of the grandmothers be equal, so there's more than one grandmother, they're all going to inherit the sixth, and it's going to be split between them. And then 67, 68, and 69. وإن تكن قربى لأم حجبت أم أب بعد وسدس سلبت وإن تكن بالعكس كالقولان في كتب أهل العلم منصوصان لا تسقط البعد على الصحيح واتفق الجد على التصحيح. So, and a sixth is divided, 67. If there is a closer maternal grandmother to the deceased, she will prevent a far paternal grandmother from inheriting. In the case of the opposite, where the closer grandmother to the deceased is paternal grandmother, then there are two opinions in the Shafi'i madhab on that. The first opinion is that the far maternal grandmother will not be prevented from inheriting, and this is the position of the majority. And then just to do justice, let me just finish by reading 70 to 72, even if we go a little bit over. وَكُلُّ مَنْ أَدَلَّتْ بِغَيْرِ وَارِثِ فَمَا لَهَا حظ من الموارث وتسقط البعد بذات القرب في مذهب الأولى فقل لي حسبي وقد تناهت قسمة الفروض من غير إشكال ولا غموض. And every female who claims through one not inheriting has herself no portion in inheritance. So if her name is not called on the roster of who's inheriting after the deceased, then she's not going to inherit. And the distant kinswoman is excluded by the near in the first opinion. So that we said in the madhab there are two opinions. One is that she blocks, and one is that she doesn't. This is the second opinion. And here ends the distribution of the shares without perplexity or intricacies. I know that this was a little bit, maybe a lot. I will try in the next lecture to kind of summarize what we did in the section of 1/6. But this is basically what we read in the Matn of Abi Shuja'. It's just kind of stacked a little bit differently. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina wa maulana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillah, in today's class we did the section of 1/3 and 1/6. The 1/3 is the same as the Matn of Abi Shuja', with the exception that we took two scenarios in relation to the mother taking the third of what is left, and this is known as al-Gharrawaini, and it comes from the hadith of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, and we talked about the two scenarios in regards to that. But the reason they're not mentioned in the Matn of Abi Shuja' is because when you do the math of it, they're not really a third. But it's referred to as she gets a third of what's left because that's the phraseology of the Quran. And then the bulk of the lecture is we did the lines of poetry from 51 to 72. So we did those lines, which is a lot, about the sixth. We know that there are 7 categories. As we talked about in the Matn of Abi Shuja', there are the 7 categories of the people that inherit the sixth. So we went through those, which is pretty standard, but we also made references to the Gharrawaini scenario. And then we also learned that there's a difference of opinion about multiple grandmothers between the Shafi'i Hanafis on one side and the Malikis on another side. And then we did some of the adilla as it relates to the grandmothers narrating a sixth. And then we talked at the end of the difference of opinion about the nearness or the closeness of the grandparents. So we said that if there's a grandmother, the closer grandmother to the deceased, if the grandmother to the paternal grandmother, when the closer grandmother to the deceased is a paternal, what's going to happen with the other grandmother, the further one? And we said in our madhab, in the stronger madhab, in the Shafi'i madhab, she's not blocked. The further one is not blocked from inheriting, but in the weaker position, she is blocked. So there are two positions attributed to Imam Shafi'i on that. So there was a lot. There's a couple of newer things, and what I'm going to do probably in the next lecture, tomorrow's lecture, is just summarize those newer things, and then we'll go on to the next section, which is a ta'asib, which is the universal male inheritors. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.